Everybody who's joining us joining the video or using the Google Plus Hangout, we're going to start this broadcast in about 2 minutes. And you can join us in two ways. You can obviously view the video through one of our landing pages. Down on the bottom of our landing page, there actually has a link to my Google Plus page, which you can actually make comments and participate. So just give us 1 minute while we have a few other people to join us, and we'll be started in about 2 minutes. Folks that are just joining us, we're going to wait about 1 more minute and we'll get started with this panel discussion. If you did just join us and you'd like to participate in the discussion, you can obviously use Twitter and use the hashtag of panel 2012, or you can visit my Google Plus page, which is linked at one of our landing pages. Down the bottom, you'll actually see it says join the discussion, and you can link to that and you can participate in the discussion. So give us about 1 more minute. All right, folks, I think we're going to get started. First off, I'd like to say thank you for joining all the folks that are attending this live broadcast of a panel discussion. This is going to be the first of many panel discussions that Wikispaces will be hosting over the next school year of the 2012-2013 school year. Today's topic is about blended learning and flipped classroom skills and experiences. The format of this is going to be around 40 minutes of question and answer proposed by the panel, and then we're going to open it up to the larger audience to answer some questions from you. I mentioned this earlier. If folks want to join in the discussion online or on a back channel, use the hashtag in Twitter for panel 2012, or you can obviously go to our Google Plus, my Google Plus page and write in comments in the live video hangout, and we'll be responding to that. My name is Ryan Bouse, and I work with Wikispaces, and I'll be co-moderating this with Wendy Gorton, who's also at Wikispaces. Hey, there's Wendy. She gave a good wave. And what we've done is we put together 4 leading experts in the field that have been working through blended learning topics and blending learning and flipped classroom skills within their environment, and we figured what better way to kind of share the knowledge than to hear how they went about it and their thoughts around this subject. So first off, I'm going to go around the table and do a quick introduction. As Director of Technology from the Lick Wilmerding School in San Francisco, acting as a tech subject matter expert as well as a technology expert, we have Jonathan Murgy. He's up there. Yep, there we go, Jonathan. One of the things also representing from the East Coast, we have Kathy Welsh, who is from the St. Paul Schools for Girls. She is a Director of Educational Technologists. And we also have an interesting individual from the Pacific Northwest. We have 2 people from the Pacific Northwest acting as a faculty member at 2 schools. One is the Oregon Episcopal School and also the online school for girls, and that is Mike Galtney. And he is going to be able to provide some interesting facts about what the typical traditional day school is like, as well as an online school. And then from a fantastic but really oftentimes rainy city, we have Nick Creech, who's a faculty member from the University Prep School in Seattle. So we have a fantastic group of folks, and we're really excited about this. One thing was very apparent when we reached out to the community about having this panel was that it's a pressing topic, and a lot of folks have a lot of interest in it. So one of the things I just want to remind everybody, if you want to participate in this discussion and you want to maybe ask a pointed question, you can leave a comment in the Google Plus area where it says leave comment here, or you can join us in the back channel of Twitter and use hashtag panel 2012. So let's get started. So one of the first things I wanted to do is I wanted to start with Michael. Michael, you know, this is obviously a hot pressing topic, this idea of blended learning and flipped classroom, and there's obviously a lot of vendors and a lot of educational groups trying to bring them to their community. You know, what I'd love to hear from you is maybe you can help the group, the larger audience, just give us what your thoughts are as how you define each one of these and how you think it's going to impact education as the larger community knows it.
Yeah, these are good questions, Ryan, and I think it's a good idea for us to begin trying to define blended learning and understanding how the flipped classroom fits into blended learning. So I do see one as being included in the other. So let's start just by simply defining blended learning. In simplest terms, it's learning within one course that happens both online and in the traditional classroom. There are also models emerging. There are some in San Francisco, for example, and in other places where whole schools are blended. I think in our context, maybe during our panel discussion, what we're interested in is, you know, within one particular course. So we've got students and teachers interacting online as well as in the classroom, and that's like the simplest definition of blended learning. Now, I think flipped classroom is simply one way to do blended learning. You know, the kind of understanding today of what the flipped classroom is making what might have been done in the class done as outside of class work, or what we used to call homework, and then what the out of class work used to be is now what happens in class. So those are kind of the simplest definitions for blended learning. If we want to complicate it a little bit more, which I think we should since we've got the time, I think blended learning can happen on a continuum. So there could be a very minimal amount of blended learning to a great amount. One of the courses that I teach at the Online School for Girls is a professional development course for teachers. We've just finished a couple of those this summer on blended learning. We do an introduction to blended learning course. And what we say in there is that we've got sort of web-supported instruction or high-tech classroom, but that blended learning actually sees something like 30 to 70 or 80% of student learning happening online. So the way we can understand blended learning is that if we say, where and when do students learn? Well, if they're learning online on their own schedule, asynchronously or synchronously, but it's online, then we push that toward the blended end of the spectrum. So I think you can really go for a little bit to a lot. But again, in simplest terms, Ryan, it's taking some of what we do traditionally in class and some of what we do online and sticking them together.
So that's a really good summary. And do you think that the individual schools should think of it like this continuum, that they're able to do some blended learning without disrupting their full-scale pedagogy, or do you think that they need to commit to it and do it, or how do you see it working out that way?
Yeah, I think that this a good way to begin would be to think about, what are our goals for our students? What are we really trying to accomplish? How does it fit our mission? And if what we're trying to accomplish is allowing students to personalize learning for themselves, to explore things that they're passionate about, then I think blended learning is the absolute easiest way to go, because it makes what we do so much easier. It allows us to use the time more effectively that we have with students by moving some of it online. So I think schools can think of it, especially independent schools like all of us here on the panel, in a few different ways. One, you could think about taking individual traditional courses that exist in the school schedule and asking the faculty to start thinking about what they can do to move some of the learning online, to free up student time, or in fact, because some of us have found that some of what we do actually works better online than it does face-to-face, believe it or not. So we could do that, which is a great idea. Maybe to push it even a little further, we can think of changing how we organize our school days to allow students more free time and probably narrow down the specific best ways for them to learn. I'm thinking, for example, of a program that's being done at an independent school on the East Coast where they have an 8th grade class, and they've found in their class that they don't need the 5 class meetings per week, that it works really well for them to have 2 class meetings that are a little longer, and then students spend more of their time building community, working with difficult questions online, and then coming in to see their teachers on like a more one-to-one tutor basis. So now we're talking about not just blending the course, but finding ways within the daily school schedule to blend both online learning and traditional face-to-face brick and mortar classroom learning. So I think, to answer your question, when schools begin approaching this, they have to ask the question, what are we trying to get our students to do? If we want them to be able to personalize learning, build community, collaborate with each other, cooperate, and build networks outside the walls of their classroom and across schools, across space and time, then blended learning is really a good way to go.
That's awesome. That's a good point. And you kind of, made me think about something I want to ask Kathy, because I know she might have some experience in this, is that a lot of the times, there's a lot of buzz around this subject, and there's real tangible values to it. I've read articles where they say that these classes of blended or flipped learning are more sustainable. They have greater educational effectiveness, that they improve learning. But what do you see, Kathy, as someone who's living, breathing this, the director of educational technology? What do you see as the real value at the end of the day for schools to take the reins and do blended learning or flipped classroom technologies?
I'm going to build pretty much on what Mike just said. And Mike, you brought up some great points about the differences between blended learning, the differences between the flipped classroom and things like that. And basically, there are a lot of things that are takeaways when you do offer more blended learning types of features in your classroom. But basically, it's a good lifelong learning skill to take responsibility and control of their own learning. So this teaches people, if you want to go way back to constructivism and how do they build their own knowledge and things like that, so that they learn how to apply the necessary study habits, timekeeping, time management. They apply analytical skills and critical thinking skills for practice problems. And basically, it's an extension of your classroom within its own walls. So it's a change from the passive lecture, and it's where basically you were just sitting there and listening, and there was no interactivity, to if someone had to ask a question, it basically became a single tutor session. So it's a big change then to allow many of the other kids to have a voice to be heard, and to just through some experiments or actually research that we've done, where we have actually done word counts to say what kind of information comes from a discourse forum like a discussion board or something like that. And basically what we came up with is 80% of the knowledge that you want them to know comes through in the discussion board, but you also get 21% of the people that offer something new, and 20% of the people that also offers something that they've talked about in the past. So there's this constant spiral and rolling of information as the kids go forward. So I think some of the changes that teachers might need to make when they decide to offer some blended learning or flip the classroom for a unit or two is to check and see how you're going to assess your students. So that will change, because you may not be able to do it in the exact same way, where you would say, instead you might have them ask a question that might be cross-curricular, or you might have them apply their skill to a real problem, or something like that. And then it improves their learning in that way too.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Kathy. And one word that I heard you say a lot, and I'm sure it comes across to every organization or every individual, every role within your school, was change. And that folks have to be willing to kind of change their outlook, change the way they learn, the way they deliver content. And what I wanted to do was ask Jonathan about change, because one of the important things about being a technologist in this business is being able to adapt and move to different levels of technology pretty quickly. So Jonathan, with your work at Lick Wilmerding, one of the things I can envision is that thinking about delivering content and having a discussion board, as Kathy mentioned, having that be your primary area of collaboration, it must have felt challenging to folks. And how did that work? Was somebody in the faculty meetings in the year stand up and say, we're going to take this on? Was there an executive sponsor? How did it work?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's, definitely, I think in every one of our schools you have, kind of the early adopter people, the early adopter teachers that want to try some new stuff, want to try some new tools. But we've really tried to stay away from kind of, even though, we talk about flipped classroom and blended learning, trying to stay away from the kind of buzzwordy kind of thing as much as possible and really pull it back to just being a great teacher and understanding the new tools out there to reach out to students. And not only that, but it's already happening online. So students are creating Facebook groups of their classes that are mimicking that. Our students are doing Quizlets where they're quizzing each other on world language and other things. So stuff is happening, and I think a lot of the teachers and the faculty, and especially the head of school and I, see it happening all the time. So it's how can we be a part of that, and how can we help guide that? And then how can we provide value to that, and how can we reach out to students, especially with different learning styles, and the ability to do that. So really just trying to say, hey, how can we be, what is quote unquote good teaching? And I'm lucky in the sense that the school I'm at, Lick Wilmerding, has a wonderful tradition about using tools and shops and tech arts. So the teachers get using tools and when to use the right tool, when not to use a tool, and that kind of stuff. So this is really just kind of an extension of that, and saying, okay, here's another way to do it. Here's another way to be more efficient, maybe with your class time, and then also, be able to have that connection and that relationship with students who are coming at the material different ways.
No, that's a good point, and it probably, as far as the early adopters, they're your biggest advocates, I would assume. They're the ones that are kind of driving this initiative as a group, rather than it being, a mandate set by somebody. But and maybe the students are driving it too, right?
Well, it's the teachers, and again, the peer, and it also is a professional development. That's another big draw. Is now teachers are looking at this, and yes, you have the early adopters that I'm going to throw some tech to, and we're going to try some different things, maybe at a course level, maybe at a controlled class level. But it's also when teachers see what other teachers are doing, they respect the teaching style of that teacher already, and now they're saying, well, how can I apply that in my content, in my delivery? And everyone who I've ever met, who's a teacher here, wants to be a better teacher. They want to be a better teacher. So the idea of just giving that access and giving that availability to them, and then also having it be genuine and have the teacher, own it and own the technology and be connected to it. And if the students don't see that, and they see that it's kind of gimmicky, or almost like teachers who are kind of reluctant to use interactive whiteboards or something, when it's not integrated into the curriculum or not integrated into their content, you can tell, and the students can tell. And same thing with online and blended learning. It's got to be something that they live and breathe, and when they do, they become better teachers in the way, and then they think about how they're going to deliver that content. And they're also, to Mike's point about scheduling, they're also a little bit better about what are we going to do in class with the time that we have. And a lot of independent schools like us have these rotating block schedules where we have different things going on and everything else. And then these kids are also they're doing so many other things on top of it, extracurricular and other things that are involved with athletics and clubs and all these other things. So the time-shifted, capability to be able to do this stuff is just so critical. So when teachers see other teachers doing that, that is the best, that is the best promotion, I think, because they see the advantage. And then also students are saying, hey, so-and-so is doing this, why can't you guys do this? Or why can't we do this over here? And with our work with digital portfolios, I think it's a great example where, it kind of started in one department, but then the students are coming through and saying, well, I want to do this in my digital portfolio too, is that okay? And so it's kind of becoming this advocacy at all different levels.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. And you mentioned a little bit about professional development, and I'm going to ask Nick this question. Um, you know, how are faculty, Nick, at UPrep responding to more and more use of blended learning, flipped classroom techniques in the classroom? Are they open to it? Do you see an age, cultural, gender, biases, or is it just something that it all depends on what the subject is, and they're willing to take it on?
I think that's a very complex question, and the way I want to approach that is kind of taking the last three wonderful panelists and kind of going back on that and kind of the methodology, or actually the ideology of what you want to get out of it. And for us at UPrep, I believe that it's more about giving the power of education and learning to students. And then how do you create an environment that fosters student advocacy and student growth? And I think this is just another tool. It's not about the tool so much as it is about the education or the learning space. And to answer that question, I know I'm kind of going off on a tangent, so I apologize, Ryan, but
that's okay.
I'm very passionate. Okay, I'm very passionate about this, and I love learning and education. And Mike talks about the brick and mortar classroom. So if we can just tear down those walls and allow students to learn at their own pace, wherever they choose to learn, however they learn best, I think we benefit more kids than not. I don't think this is the holy grail of education by any means, but it's another tool, and Jonathan was talking about this. It's just another tool for effective teachers. I believe that teachers that have the most tools can adapt those tools to their particular teaching style, and thus benefit the students. And that's kind of what we're about, is what's best for our kids, and we'll do whatever it takes to reach them where they're at. And I think that includes the social media. And as far as kind of rewinding a little bit, for me, I can't speak for everybody. At UPrep, I think it's best for us right now to do it at the higher level, high school. We're a 6 through 12 school. And then we're just going to kind of see where it goes from there. But it's under the principle of what's best for our students and how can we put students at the front of the class, not the teacher. So we're taking the emphasis from the teacher, giving it to the students, and having them take ownership of their learning. And I think that's, from my opinion, awesome.
Yeah. So I'm gonna ask you a follow-up question to that, and I also am gonna ask Wendy to chime in, because Wendy's background has an extensive background in professional development. So it's kind of a two-pronged question. So first, for Nick, do you feel that folks that are coming out of universities or colleges with teaching interests, do you feel that they're getting the exposure and the training to take on these technologies as part of a teaching certification program, or is it just their age that's making them much more willing to take kind of risks? What are your thoughts around that?
I think it's both, to be honest with you. I would like to see certification programs dive more into kind of the tools that are out there. I think all too often we get bogged down by theory, and that's great, we need that, but I think also we need to focus and train teachers on how to train students on what's a good source versus a bad source, how to navigate this limitless world of information, because no longer are we teachers the experts in content where kids can pull out their smartphones in class and figure out the answer perhaps faster than I can give it to them. So
right.
It's more about having thoughtful questions versus providing answers. And I think if we can create a structure, I do see, from my standpoint, I see the younger teachers being more willing to take risks in this role. They're more willing to just kind of dive in and get nasty and figure it out and understand that, you know what, they're going to fail, and that's okay, because that's what we want our students to do too. So, and I'm not sure if it's an age thing, but I from my standpoint, I do see our younger faculty members doing it a little bit more.
Interesting. Yep. And Wendy, what's your experience? You've engaged a lot of folks doing professional development, and specifically with some blended learning training programs. What are your thoughts around the professional development and these technologies, or these approaches, I should say?
I mean, I really think after listening to Jonathan and Nick, using your tech champions that are already at your site. I mean, learning from your colleagues is huge, right? Seeing what they're doing, very non-threatening approaches like having exhibitions of work, right? Inviting other classrooms in just to see your students' work. That's what I think it's all about with blended learning is you now have this platform where students can share authentic products with each other, with the world. So step one with good professional development is take advantage of the rock stars like Nick is talking about. You know, if you do have younger teachers, but I've known, you know, older teachers too that are on Twitter that are experimenting with these things. Help them be a role model. I was just at a workshop in Ventura, California. I don't know if Ann Jenks is watching, but she's a principal down there in Oxnard. And she's been around, she's been teaching 30 plus years. And here she is in this workshop experimenting. She got her video up before everybody else, but people looked at her as a role model, and she likes being that role model and saying, you know, if I can do it, you know, everybody should be able to do it at this site. So finding those tech champions, having them be your role models, and giving them areas of leadership, right? Let them be on the committee, let them share at lunchtime, any opportunity to share with everybody else. It's that much more for kind of organic growth and interest in different tools, for sure.
No, that's very helpful, and I kind of want to still go with the theme here for a little bit. I want to dig a little bit deeper around professional development, and I'm going to kind of go back to you, Kathy, and ask a little bit more about, you know, you support teachers in an organization on how to use technology in a classroom to educate, and as far as you're concerned, and you know there might be some folks from your school watching, so I'm sure you'll be as honest as you can, but do you feel like you're equipped and that you have the right skill sets to really kind of get that viral adoption? Like, what are your thoughts like around that educational technologist space? Is it moving incredibly fast and it's hard to keep up, or is it just kind of part of the job?
You know, that's a great question, and truthfully, it is part of the job. And you just start, like Wendy was saying, and you take advantage of the people who are willing to try, or they'll come to you and say, you know, I was thinking about doing blah, 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 and then you can move them up to the next level and say, oh, I like that idea, and we can use parts of that, but now there's a different tool that the kids can already know that you may be able to be even better at getting the message through. So many times, because I'm not your younger teacher, they will try something because they think, oh, geez, you can try that, and we do exactly what you were saying. We look for places in their curriculum that lend themselves naturally to this, so that their fear of failure or their over excitement of trying something new, whichever angle it comes from, it becomes much more natural and a closer part to them in teaching. Also, we offer professional development classes for people who would like to try something in a non-threatening environment and try it with 4 or 5 other people, so that you have a small group right there who can try it out and say, all right, let's try this, or let's do this on the wiki and tell me what happens if you all change colors, or let's try this, or let's do something over here with video that you would like to do. That way, the excitement builds, the student goes to the next class and tells the next class, oh gosh, you know what we did in Mrs. So-and-so's class, and that would be really good here, which then the teacher comes and said, oh, you know, I wouldn't mind trying it. I don't know how to do it. I just told him to do it. So that kind of excitement rolls through. And you always have your people that are resistors, but even the resistors like to try something new. They want to be part of it. Everybody does want to be part of it.
No, that makes complete sense. And, you know, as you were saying all that, Kathy, I started to think about, you know, the product of all this is the student, and that we're really talking about kind of focusing how do we educate. Nick, I think you said it great. I'm not going to say it exactly the way you did, but you said, you know, how do we facilitate learning for the students? And so, Mike, I want to propose a question to you. And you know, you are a unique situation. You're teaching at a, you know, I use the word traditional. By no means is Oregon Episcopal School traditional, but the idea is that you have a day program where students come into your classroom, attend certain sections, and then you are a faculty member on a online only space. So do you see students or types of students specifically flourishing in one environment over another, or is it really a student can flourish in both?
Well, I think, Ryan, students can flourish in both. They need a little bit of help, and so I want to get to that. If I could just follow up on one of the things that was just said a moment ago, I think an important thing for us to understand in getting teachers to think about blended learning is it's not about technology. We're talking a lot about technology, and we have a bunch of education technology people on the panel, but this is not about technology. This is about verbs, I might say. Do we want students to create? Do we want students to cooperate? Do we want students to connect? These are important verbs, and these are verbs that have always lived within our course goals. Now technology simply provides an opportunity to use those in a more powerful way. So we want to get folks to understand, I think, that as individual teachers, we have our pedagogical goals, and the technology is just a supporting thing. It's not the answer. So we're not here to talk about integrating technology. I think that that's a passé notion, that really what we want to do is understand how the world works today, and the world is tech-rich, and technology is everywhere. As Chris Lehman says, it's like air, and we have to just understand that and use it. So I think that that's really important. So back to your question about which students flourish. I think all students can flourish, but I think we have to have some understandings that students come to the online space, like Jonathan mentioned earlier, with a Facebook page. Maybe some of them are using Twitter. A lot of my students show up tumbling, so they're using Tumblr. So they have some understanding of how the web works. But they need to have an understanding about how we use it in the academic ways. So it does take a little time to get them going. I know in my traditional brick and mortar classroom at Oregon Episcopal School, for example, that my students need to be brought up to speed a little bit on how we use the online space. Teachers need to think about appropriate use for their classroom. I work with my students and we set up Netiquette, that's N-E-T-I, Netiquette in the first few weeks of school. You know, how do we communicate with each other? Again, that's also not about technology, that's about what we've always done. But you know, understanding it's a little bit different than Facebook language, right? We're not, you know, using PLZ for please. We're using academic language, and we communicate in that way. So that's one of the things we need to have an understanding of. But then also students need to understand that important point that Kathy made earlier about taking control of their learning. They have to show initiative. We have expectations built around that. So that kind of gets to a distinction about students. Students need to be able to show individual responsibility. They need to have agency. They need to be self-advocates, like Nick was talking about earlier. So that's something that students need. And Ryan, if students don't have that, then those are the kind of students that are going to be more challenged working on their own in an online space. But it would be my assertion that that's always been the case with students who don't do homework or don't do well outside of class, working in small groups. These are the same kinds of skills students are going to bring. On the online side, when I teach for online school for girls, for those students who only ever meet with me online, then it becomes even more important. If they don't have those, you know, self-driven skills, they struggle, and they need more attention. And I have a couple of thoughts about that. One, that shows us that continuum of blended, where we can take students who struggle working alone, and because some of them are otherwise good at it, it frees me up as an instructor to work individually with students, which is helpful to me in building their initiative and helping to build their personal responsibility and their own independent learning skills. And then those students that are doing really well, they do fine. They do fine with that. So I think as a practical matter for teachers, when you start blended learning, you can't just expect you're going to put it online and this is the silver bullet, it's going to solve all of our problems. You know, the students are going to need some support, and you're going to have to recognize that those students who have a hard time being on task are going to require your assistance.
Yeah, no, that's actually, it's interesting to bring it down to the fundamental principles of what you're trying to teach students outside of just the education, but about, I think you mentioned, it's been, a lot of the folks on the panel mentioned this, empowerment, self-ownership of the learning. I know, Kathy, you mentioned that earlier. So regardless of the online environment, you need to be able to train them to do that. So, you know, I'm going to just ask Nick real quick, what do you think the the students' reactions are to some of this. A lot of them are digital natives. They only, I laugh when my 7-month-old son, when I'm Skyping with his grandmother, my mother, he's going to think that video has always been part of a phone conversation, and we all know that's not the case. So are students more open to it? Are they craving it? What's your impressions, Nick?
My impression is that they are. I mean, they're there already. I think, unfortunately, some teachers need to get there as well. Some schools need to get there. I always feel like they're, in that realm, they're ahead of us, and they're willing to take these risks. I think that, it's just another, like I said, it's just another tool. Like, they love to be social, and they love to learn. It's just a matter of, now we have the technology to meld those two things where they can learn at their own pace, and at the same time, really have fun and engage in other people, their peer groups, and share and collaborate, like Mike was talking about. That's kind of what I see. Is for the most part, the kids are willing to jump in and take these risks. We as adults in the community better know what's going on and better be able to kind of train them on what's a good post versus a bad post, and what's an intelligent post versus a not intelligent post. Yeah. So I think that's our role.
Yeah. And Nick, if I could jump in, I'm just monitoring the Twitter feed and the Google Plus feed, and we've got Peter from Portland. Would love to know a little bit more about what you guys are doing with what does it look like at the classroom implementation level? So is that a digital citizenship curriculum that comes from the administrative department? Is it on kind of teachers on their own? And how do you implement blended learning on the classroom level? And then how do you help equip your teachers with, is it lesson plans or resources to do exactly what you said, Nick, right? Equip them to learn what the good commenting and good discourse looks like online.
This is a great question for Mike to answer. I think he does a lot of this, and I think if that's okay, Mike, I'm going to set you up for that one.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. So, I think if you're going to get started, at the ground level, I think the teachers can't be afraid to experiment. I think that's the first thing. Again, it comes back to your goals. What are you trying to do? For me, I teach history and government. So I want students to do research. It's very easy for me to implement blended learning trying to teach historical thinking skills and research skills, because I ask students to create discussions online where they talk about the resources they've found, and that's an easy thing to do. Probably somebody on the panel will get into what tools you can use for that. And that's an easy thing to do. There's lots of tools available. But getting started with the implementation is, again, thinking about what do I want to do. So let's say I want students to create discussion forums. I want students to have a place to put up work and comment back and forth. Well, that's what wikis are for. So, Wikispaces is a great resource for that. I use Wikispaces and Google Sites, great places for students to put work up. So that's another kind of on-the-ground place to get started. Certainly, if you're just thinking about flipping your classroom and you want students to do, rather than doing verbs online, but something more like a passive verb, like just consume, yeah, well, then you can find video online and have students go to watch those or go to read an article, and then you can come back to class and conduct a discussion. That's kind of the classic flipped classroom idea. So I don't know if that answers the question. I think, I saw Peter's tweet, and I think Peter really wants to get us thinking about, if I'm an individual teacher, what can I do? And so what I want to say to individual teachers is experiment, don't be afraid of it, and go to those people who at your school are already kind of starting, the pioneers. My experience at schools is there's always 3 or 4 people who are kind of trying things. Find those people and latch onto them. If you're watching this webinar, it's likely that you heard about it through email or maybe through Twitter. Well, there's really nothing you can do better than to create a Twitter account and start following teachers like the people on this panel who are experimenting and sharing what they're doing. You can read their blogs and their posts on Twitter and get lots of ideas to get started. So like we're talking about students taking control of their own learning, this is a great opportunity for teachers to demonstrate lifelong learning skills by learning about this topic on their own and then doing some implementation and experimenting. We'll teach students it's okay to try things and fail sometimes, and there are also big successes.
We have actually two panelists that also want to chime in. So Jonathan's going to go first, then Kathy, I'm going to have you go next. So I think this is a good tangent, so let's go for it.
Yeah, and I think with this, it's definitely coming back to something that we've always had, I think, in all teachers, regardless of what environment it is, the community norms. And we've added some other things, social media kind of guidelines for the school that we kind of formalized, and that's just not for the students, that's for the faculty, that's for the parents, that's for everyone. And again, it's just kind of a reminder to explain that there's some different capabilities and different stuff that's going on out there, but it doesn't differ from the mission, it doesn't differ from what the departments and what the teacher goals are. It's just trying to maybe get a little more detailed without getting so specific that we start calling out specific services or specific things, but just creating some guidelines around that. And I think students, at least from what I've seen, and again, we're a high school, they really like being able to use these tools and online for something that is a little more substantial and a little bit more just a little more fruitful. So I mean, they're eager to do that, and I think just providing those guidelines as much as you can is very, very useful. But we do it through community norms, through guidelines, and those are things that go across everyone. Everyone's completely transparent about what those rules and what those guidelines are.
Great. Kathy, do you have a...
Yes, I'm going to address two areas. One is that we are a 5 through 12 school, and we begin to use the skills of online and blended learning in the 5th grade. We begin very young, and we also begin in a sense that's a closed environment, so there is not a chance for other people to be chiming in that are not welcome. But we also teach through the same way that Mike was saying and Nick was saying, that we explain it in real words. How do you talk to somebody? What would you want someone to say about you? How would you like, if we couch it in a lot of different ways about how do you script your answer when you're providing constructive criticism towards someone's paper, for instance. So we teach them in small little increments. So when we start to do these kind of blending in with different kinds of tools, we begin with the purpose. All right, this is what our purpose is. We need to have some discussion about this because of whatever, and then let's try this tool. So that teacher begins with a small amount of information to start with, and that maybe it's one day, maybe it's one day of her lesson, and maybe the next time she may have another question that may go across time or whatever, that they will revisit, and maybe their points of view will change because they're reading a literature or whatever. But that's how we do it. So by the time the girls hit, we're in an all-girls school, by the time the girls go to high school, they're well versed in what are the yeses and the nos, so to speak, about how to behave in the educational setting in an online type of environment. That way, the new people who are blended in every year through in each of the new classes also models. They're reading and modeling what the other girls are doing, and it's not to say that our situation is perfect, but it certainly does help when we have a good base already.
No, that's very helpful. And one of the things I kind of wanted to quickly ask, and that's one of the things that I want to ask each one of the panels. I'm just watching the clock. We have about 10 more minutes left in the actual scheduled session. So what I want to do is I want to kind of wrap it up with asking each individual panelist to maybe give what their suggestions would be to, obviously there's a lot of people on this watching this broadcast that are interested in trying this, and I want to ask each panelist what their thoughts are, or what their 1 minute kind of recommendation would be to those people. There's going to be a lot of obstacles, obviously, for them to overcome. You've each kind of answered this as we've gone through it, but what recommendation would you give? Once we go through the kind of recommendations off each one of the panelists, we're going to open it up to Twitter questions and to the Google Plus questions, and see if there's any individuals that want to have their questions answered directly. So let's start with Nick, I'm going to go Nick, Jonathan, Kathy, Michael. So Nick, what's the one recommendation that you would give to somebody that's evaluating this and thinking about trying to do something, whether it's a teacher or an administrator or someone in professional development? What would you give them to say, hey, go out and try this?
Yeah. Well, I think first you have to backwards plan. I think, what is your ultimate goal? And then if technology fits into that ultimate goal, great. To address your point specifically, go for it. I think, like I said earlier, just diving in, you're going to mess up, and that's okay. But having a PLN, I'm seeing it on my Twitter stream right now, professional learning network, I think that's key to bounce ideas off, to bump up against things. I think that's a good, healthy way to learn. And it also models, what we want our kids to do.
Yeah.
So I think the beauty about teaching, and I'll end with this, the beauty about teaching is you always get a redo, whether it be next year, next month, next lesson, tomorrow, whatever it may be, you always get a redo. So it's not like, that's where I'm going to leave it, I guess. So thank you.
No, that's perfect. Okay, who's up next? Jonathan, you're up next. What's the one thing you would recommend?
I would recommend, this is what we did with the head of school, is to try and create, a grant or grant for innovation or something like that works, where you can actually get it before the next year, so teachers have the ability to maybe work on the summer for something if they're really into it, they're really interested in that environment. The other quick thing, what I would say is maybe focus on some of the classes that happen during the summer, like bridge classes for math or for other things that you can get a little more creative. You have a smaller population of students and the teacher, and it can be a little bit more experimental. But just getting involved and reaching out, the students will see that, and the students and teachers just knowing that they're trying to work together and understand each other's styles and using tools to be able to do that is just awesome.
Perfect. Kathy?
All right, really quick, because I think I've already said mine, but
it's okay.
maybe 2 or 3 times. I would say start with small steps and lead to larger, more complex environments. Another good approach is go to your administration and say, hey, I want to show you something. This is what I'm thinking, and let them be part of it. So that way they're experiencing the same things that you're having in your classroom.
And I guess that makes me last. So I'm going to take the contrarian position and say, don't wait for your school. Don't wait for an administrator.
Nice.
Start doing it. I was asked recently at Ed Camp, Mike, how did you start blended learning? I thought, that's a great question. So I went back and I thought about, did my principal or my head of school come to me and say, go and do it? No, it didn't happen. I decided I wanted to take on building a personal learning network, and I just learned from smart people like these people on the panel and some of the people who are tweeting. I'm learning right now from everybody involved in this. Learn on your own and start experimenting and innovating. Trust me, administrators are going to be impressed with what you're doing, and they're going to ask you questions, and your colleagues will. So let's democratize this whole process. Get everybody involved, and that's how the grassroots movement can work.
I'm going to jump off of Mike's. We talk a lot about kind of going rogue and empowering teachers to try a tool. And that they can be the pilot then, whether it's a Wikispaces portal, if it's Google Docs or Edmodo. One teacher can set that environment up, show other teachers, show your admin, and then it's the ripple effect. Like Jonathan said, everybody wants to do it. So letting your teachers be leaders and give it a go and just try it. If it fails, you try a different tool. And my second one is just empower your students. Have a geek squad, have a tech team at your school site. They want to help, and they come up with things that you can't even think of with tools, just like all the tools everybody talked about on the panel. So use your teachers, use your students, and just create that culture of innovation and okay to fail and okay to try new things and get everybody on board.
Awesome. Thanks, Wendy. So what I want to do now, if it's possible, anybody who's on the Twitter stream or on the Google Plus comments wants to ask a specific question to any one of the panelists, feel free to do it. A couple housekeeping things while we do that and while you write your questions. We are recording this section, and it will be posted to a Wikispace YouTube channel. My guess will be probably sometime at the beginning of the week. If you signed up for this, through our web form and you want to receive the email when that goes out, you don't have to do anything. If there is folks that have not signed up this but found it, kind of stumbled upon it through Google+, you can email Wendy or I, and we'll get you the link once it's published. So let's see. Did anybody have any specific questions?
I've got someone, Aiden in Turkey on Google+, wondering about assessment of these skills, since this is a new skill set, basically that we're asking students to take on, and teachers as well. If you're looking at like ISTE net standards, both for teachers and students, maybe we can just have a couple of you share successes you've had. I know that I've helped create rubrics with students for blog postings and such like that, for student-centered kind of creation of rubrics, but I'd love to hear from the team, and for Aiden in Turkey, maybe ideas for assessment with these skills.
Yeah, from my standpoint, I'm a firm believer in formative assessment. You know, assessing the progress of learning versus the end result of learning, because I don't think there is an end result to learning. So for me, I think it lends itself very, very, very nicely to formative assessment. And what I mean by that is giving direct feedback to students, whether it be you decide to do a blog post like Mike does, or that have students interact with one another and give feedback on student work, that peer reflection piece. Also, I think a major component for me would be self-reflection. I'm a firm believer in reflection, and I think for me, formative assessment lends itself very nicely to the flipped classroom and blended learning.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
I'm sorry, John. I'm just going to echo everything Nick said, so exactly what Nick said, and then add to that that if you're now deciding that you want to assess an additional piece of learning goals, which are like the goals that you've created because you're blended, which might be like, you know, connecting online, understanding how to be a good digital citizen and how to make comments online like that, then you can develop rubrics for that. But I think also the face-to-face and face-to-face with teacher and student, and then the peer assessment works really well for that also. Nice. But kind of the bigger piece is that, you know, we're still trying to assess what do students know. And if the goals are the learning in your content area, blended learning is just the strategy. And then part of that strategy is creating assessments as you've always done. Whether exams are still useful in blended learning, I don't give exams, but exams are still useful. But then the formative assessment that Nick spoke about, students making products, like project-based stuff, writing a blog, posting a video online, these are classic methods. I say classic, this is a new thing really in the last 10 years. But these are sort of emerging best practices for assessment in blended learning. Sorry, John, go ahead.
No, that's fine. I think, you know, the points, again, for both of you, it's the assessment, the self-assessment, also, you know, some basic metrics about, you know, expectations of participation. And I think, again, being an independent school, we have the luxury of being able to have that face-to-face as well. So, and then you've also got, at least, you know, in our school we have an advisory program and everything else. So we've got adults working with kids, you know, all day. And so there's definitely that overall assessment that's happening as well. But I mean, the idea of being able to, you know, have tests or direct assessments for stuff, I think that's pretty tough. We look at it more as, you know, from a teacher perspective and an individual teacher, not even at a department level. An individual teacher, are you more effective in the classroom? This is, again, more teacher-centric, but are you more effective in the classroom with the content that you want to work with face-to-face? And is there a way that you can take maybe the lessons, or maybe you use WebAssign, maybe you do some other things in the science part of the world, you know, for different things, or we have some math stuff. Can you use technology and kind of, you know, time shift for those type of things? And do the students, you know, use that? Are there metrics around, you know, views on videos and other things? And again, this is more technology focused, but, you know, so there's measuring that. Is it, you know, something where a student this you know, made the big difference for me? I think that's pretty tough to assess. But you know, you just try to hit those, and you try to get, you know, to Nick's point about more tools, you just try to get that out there. So you're hoping to hit those different aspects for different students in different styles.
In our school, we try to do a lot of alternate assessments. And in this case, we did a student flipped classroom where they were responsible in a geometry class, which was a 10th grade level, and they had to give an online unit for each of their little units in geometry, and we pre-tested them and then we post-tested them using the exact same formative assessments as used before, and we found that there was a significant difference of 17% greater, that the girls did better on the same exact test. And we don't know if it was because of the newness of it or because of the involvement that they had with. We also taught them a new tool, which was Google Sites. But we're not. We're going to tease more of that out this year as we do this same unit as we just go forward. But there is a significant difference when a student does own their own learning, and when the formative assessment also is part of the learning process. So that way you have, even though we use the exact same test, they were also graded on how they went forward in their lesson.
Great.
No, that brings up a great point, is that I think we'll all be evaluating and watching the assessment part of these technologies as they move forward. There's, I was just having discussions around, if the whole idea of participation has totally changed, right? Participation used to be if you raised your hand, asked 3 questions in class, but now it's completely different. And so the exciting part about this is watching about how schools are going to implement assessments and the most effective assessments. So that's great to hear from you guys.
Even more exciting, Ryan, is the panel 2012 hashtag. I am just like, we've got Felix from Holland, we had Aiden from Turkey, we've got Neil and Mauricio and Gloria. So this is just such a snapshot of what's possible with these tools. So one question that popped up from Gloria, and it's also Lewis from the United Kingdom who popped in, but they're kind of 2 questions that are pretty similar. But your top tools for doing this, maybe we can go quickly, just what are your top tools for blended learning, and then just like favorite new tools out there that are helping this get done. Maybe we can go through everybody.
For me, I can speak to our teachers love the Bamboo Wacom tablets. They love to be able to draw stuff up, create videos from that with Camtasia, and that's very Khan Academy-esque, because those are the tools that obviously Khan uses. But our teachers love doing that. Obviously, other teachers do different things. VoiceThread is another one that if we need to talk about specific technology, where students are able to communicate different ways and different methods online. Obviously, having a robust wiki is wonderful to be able to experiment with and play around with. And then also just being able to even have a discussion group or a work group or a whiteboard that's online, and obviously keeping. I think that's the big challenge is there's so many amazing tools out there. Trying to keep it under an umbrella as a director of technology for a school, to not have to tell kids, okay, you have to go to 15 different sites to do all your homework or to do all your classwork. I think that's probably going to be the biggest challenge for a lot of us, is trying to keep that in gear, because there's so many wonderful tools out there to use. These are just some hardware and software tools.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Yeah, I might jump in and say that I've written a little bit about my top 5 tools for blended learning, and I'll post some more on my blog for folks who want to find that, and I'll tweet out the link. But
Great.
I think if your school doesn't have a learning management system, pre-built space for you to host kind of a blended environment, then I want to offer 2 ideas. One would be Edmodo, which is a free learning management tool that is highly social. Lots of opportunities to get students in discussion, which I think is one of the great things about blended learning. And there are lots of other teachers in the Edmodo space, and you can connect classrooms with them and start building relationships across space and time, so that your students can be working with the people like in Britain and Turkey, like we're on this panel with. Another one is Schoology. It's School, O-G-Y, and I want to recommend that. Twitter is great. I also really love 2 other things. One, I want students to write. Nick talked about reflection, and my students do reflection blogs and blog about, they're just always blogging. I think WordPress is great for that.
Yeah, WordPress
you could also use
great.
Blogger. And then finally, Evernote. I want to just give a plug for Evernote. Evernote allows students a place where they can take notes and we can share notes, and I think that's really useful. So I think Evernote is great, and I hope somebody else talks about Google Apps, but that's enough from me.
Well, that's what's nice about, I know Ryan and I are a little biased, but with Wikispaces, what we like and what we see a lot of teachers doing is integrating a lot of the tools that you just mentioned, Mike and John, and putting them all into one space. And so that's always been nice because the tools are just going to keep on growing. So we like to help teachers definitely integrate all those together in one spot. And especially with Google Apps integration is really a cool new feature of that because Google Docs is just out of this world for the kind of things you can do for collaboration. And so with Wikispaces together, it's kind of cool.
Yep,
If you got any to add in, Nick?
Yeah, sure. I'll pitch Digo. It's kind of an online bookmarking system. I think that's very valuable. I think perhaps Mike mentioned Evernote. Love Twitter. Love Twitter in the classroom. VoiceThread, WordPress, and this company ThoughtStream out of Canada. And you guys can research that. And that again, similar to Mike, I'll tweet that out.
And again, if I could say, as teachers, when you're considering all these tools everybody's mentioned, think first, what's the verb, and then go to think about what's the tool that fits that.
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
These are the tools that we all like, but what do you want to do? Because there's an app for that.
That's true. And I'm going to also say what Mike was talking about with your learning management system. That is a critical piece to keeping everything in one spot. And you can also, if you want to build a mini one, like we were saying, the Edmodo, that's what we start with the young kids. So that was a great thought. And we also use Google Docs in there, Google Sites as one of our as a little mini place to put everything. And I also think don't forget about digital storytelling because that you can get the reflective part of it, the visual imagery in another part. So there's creativity that's also available with digital storytelling that can bring in a lot of your content knowledge into a great little story.
And sorry, one more. I forgot a couple of things. I want to put a shout out to Whipple Hill as well. We use that. It's great. Independent schools. It's basically what everybody is logging into here on campus. It's handling a lot of our stuff, all of our academic groups, our classes, some interactive stuff. And then the other one is we do digital portfolios with open source tool called Mahara, which is a wonderful open source tool. It's used more in colleges, but it's a wonderful tool. It's Mahara, and it's a back-end LAMP-based Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP, but just been wonderful, self-hosted and WordPress and everything else. So there's all kinds of stuff out there. But again, I love what Mike's talking about with nouns and verbs, and specifically with verbs. Think about the verb. The verbs don't change, but the nouns might.
Right. And Jonathan, I also want to thank you very much. Now I'm going to go home, and my wife works for Whipple Hill. So since you pitched that and I didn't, I'm sure I'll hear about it. So thank you.
I want to get in there right before.
Wow.
And we have so many more questions online, so I'm going to ask the panel if you guys wouldn't mind helping curate online, just because there's such a good conversation starting now with so many people at the #panel 2012. So while we might not get to it on camera, I'd like to ask all of us to kind of just visit later on today, Twitter and Google Plus, and keep the conversation going because there's some great ideas. And thank you everybody for sharing tools that help you implement this in the classroom.
Yeah, and I too want to just thank the panelists. This is a great topic. I really appreciate all your time. Some of the things I heard, and one that sticks out to me was something that my grandfather taught me: use the right tool for the right job, right? And ultimately, I can't remember who said it, but think about the end in mind was another kind of thing. Like, what do you want to get out of this? Because start back in the think about the outcome, and ultimately try and fail and get back up. I love the comment, everybody gets a redo. Nick, thought that was fantastic. I'm going to use that in my personal life as well. So the fact is that this isn't about technology, it's about figuring out ways to educate our community, and I really personally appreciate everybody being on this, and it's been a lot of fun. And this is going to be the first of hopefully many of these types of panels. We might ask one of these panelists to participate at another date. One of the things Wikispaces is doing is we're trying to connect all these different types of people and all the value that they have, and try to bring the value of all of us together and express that. And so we're going to be doing a panel on how to use tools such as Google Docs and Wikispaces and things like that. We're going to bring a webinar shortly in a couple of weeks. So anybody that's signed up for this, or anybody that's on one of our landing pages, if you want more information on it, let us know. And thank you everybody for attending, and we'll catch you up online some other time.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
guys. And we'll
Thanks,
end
guys.
it with I think Mike's "Just Do It" comment really blew up on Twitter. So on the count of 3, guys, we'll all say "Just do it." 1, 2, 3.
Just
Just
do
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 it.
it. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks. Take care.